Masters, kurioi, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven. Here, Paul speaks of earthly masters, kurioi, those who are over slaves, and then of a single master or lord, kurios, who is in heaven over them all, both masters and slaves. For Paul, as a Jew, and for any Jew hearing this, and anyone steeped in the Old Testament, this one Lord who is in heaven over all can only be Yahweh, the one Lord of Israel. This one is not Lord in some earthly sense, but in a religious sense. He is in heaven and all are subject to him. And yet, Paul is clearly referring here to Christ as this Lord, because in the immediately preceding context, it is written, whatever you do, do your work heartily as for the Lord rather than for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. Notice here that Paul emphatically identifies Christ as the Lord in heaven whom men serve. So when he speaks of the one Lord who is in heaven in 4:1, he is contextually talking about Christ. More than that, he even assigns to Christ the Lord who is in heaven over all, that kind of service that Deuteronomy 6 and 10 say is to be rendered to Yahweh alone. Paul says believers are to work heartily as for the Lord. That is, believers are to serve Christ the Lord with all their hearts. Echo Deuteronomy 6:5. And he says that Christ as Lord will repay without partiality. Echo Deuteronomy 10:17. In the course of saying all of this, Paul even makes a pointed contrast here between Christ as Lord and those who are merely men. For he says we are to render our service for the Lord rather than for men. That Christ is the Lord here is further buttressed by the fact that Paul refers in this epistle to himself, Epaphras, and Tychicus as fellow bondservants of Christ in 1:7 and 4:7. And also because in that companion text, Ephesians 6, it's a sister epistle, it says, slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as to Christ, not by way of eye service as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With goodwill render service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters do the same things to them and give up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. So over and above slaves, above earthly masters, those who are masters on earth and according to the flesh, Christ is the one Lord who is in heaven, the one Lord who is over all, the one Lord who is to be served with all of our hearts, the one Lord who shows no partiality, the one to whom we owe absolute allegiance that trumps anything we owe to any man.